The night the decision was made, the entire empire held its breath. In the cold, glass-walled penthouse overlooking the neon-lit skyline of Seoul, silence carried more weight than gunfire. Everyone knew the rules: bloodline, loyalty, power. Nothing outside the circle was ever allowed in, especially not love, and definitely not her. Jinwoo had been raised to inherit everything: the power, the fear, the name that made grown men lower their eyes. As the only son of the most feared mafia boss in Korea, his life had never belonged to him. Every step had been planned, every relationship calculated, every emotion carefully controlled. But none of that mattered the moment he met her. Amara wasn't supposed to exist in his world. She didn't come from power, didn't speak with fear in her voice, and didn't know how dangerous it was to look a man like Jinwoo directly in the eyes without hesitation. She had come to Korea chasing a simple dream: work, survival, a better life. She didn't know she had walked straight into a storm. Their first meeting wasn't dramatic. No gunshots, no chaos. Just a quiet collision of two completely different worlds. She had dropped a stack of papers in a crowded office hallway, and he had been the one to pick them up. A mafia prince kneeling on polished floors, handing back something as ordinary as documents. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. There was something about her that refused to bow. When she thanked him, her voice steady and unafraid, he felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Not control, not dominance. Something human. It irritated him at first. Then it fascinated him. And before he realized it, he started finding reasons to see her again. At first, it was small things: walking past her desk, watching her from a distance, testing her reactions. She didn't treat him like the others did. She didn't flinch, didn't flatter, didn't fear him. And that was dangerous, because in his world, fear was respect. And without fear, people got hurt. His father noticed before anyone else did. The old man didn't need proof. He had built his empire by reading people in seconds. The moment he saw Jinwoo's gaze linger too long, he knew. And he didn't like it. A distraction, he called her. A weakness, he warned. But Jinwoo didn't respond. For the first time in his life, he didn't obey. Amara, on the other hand, had no idea what she was walking into. She only knew that the quiet, intense man who kept appearing around her made her feel seen in a way she couldn't explain. There was mystery in him, darkness even, but also something broken, something she didn't run from. And that was her mistake. Because loving a man like Jinwoo didn't just change your life. It put a target on your back. The first threat came quietly, a warning disguised as kindness. A job transfer, a subtle push to leave, but Amara refused. She had fought too hard to build her life. She wasn't going to run just because something felt off. That defiance sealed her fate. The night everything changed, the city lights flickered beneath a storm that hadn't yet begun. Jinwoo arrived too late. The apartment door was open. Inside, everything was still, too still. Too still. And in that silence, something inside him snapped. Because for the first time in his life, fear wasn't something he inspired. It was something he felt. The silence in the apartment wasn't empty. It was screaming. Jinwoo stepped inside slowly, his instincts sharper than ever, every nerve in his body alert. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, mixed now with something colder, something wrong. The furniture was untouched. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no overturned chairs. That was the most terrifying part. Whoever had taken her knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random. This was a message. His jaw tightened as his gaze scanned every corner, his mind already calculating, already hunting. Then he saw it, a single object left on the table. A black envelope. No name, no mark. Just placed there waiting. For him, he didn't rush. Jinwoo never rushed. He picked it up slowly, almost calmly, but the tension in his fingers told a different story. Inside was a photograph. Amara, tied to a chair, her head tilted slightly, eyes closed but breathing. Alive, for now. Beneath the photo, a single line. You chose wrong. That was all it took. The storm inside him broke completely. By the time he left the apartment, the man who had once carefully controlled every move was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Not the disciplined heir, not the calculated strategist. A son. And a man who had just been given a reason to burn the world down. Back at the penthouse, the atmosphere shifted the moment he walked in. Men who had faced bullets without blinking lowered their eyes. They could feel it. The change. The energy. This wasn't the calm, silent Jinwoo they knew. This was war. His father stood near the window, hands behind his back, as if he had already expected this outcome. He didn't turn when Jinwoo entered. "Ha, I warned you," the older man said quietly. Jinwoo didn't answer immediately. He placed the photograph on the table between them. The air thickened. "She's not part of this world," his father continued. "That is why she became a weakness." At that, Jinwoo finally spoke, his voice low, steady, but carrying something lethal beneath it. "No," he said. "You made her one." That was the first time anyone had ever spoken to the boss like that. The room froze. Slowly, the older man turned, his eyes sharp, assessing. For a moment, there was silence. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not out of amusement, out of recognition. "You've changed," he said. Jinwoo didn't deny it. "Good," his father added. Because the people who took her, they were never going to stop at just her. That was when the truth began to unravel. This wasn't just about Amara. This was about power. A rival faction, one that had been silent for years, had finally made its move. And they had chosen the perfect trigger, not money, not territory, emotion, because they knew something Jinwoo himself had only just realized. She wasn't his weakness. She was the only thing that made him human. And now that she was gone, there was nothing left to hold him back. The war didn't begin with gunfire, it began with a name. Jinwoo walked toward the table, picked up the photo again, and stared at it for just a second longer. Not with panic, not with fear, with promise. "I want everything," he said. His father raised an eyebrow. "Define everything." Jinwoo's gaze didn't waver. Every name, every location, every person connected to this. His voice dropped even lower. "And I want them to know I'm coming." That night, the Empire moved. Phones rang across cities, hidden networks activated, safe houses were exposed, alliances were tested, and one by one, the people responsible began to realize something they hadn't anticipated. They hadn't provoked a mafia prince. They had awakened something far worse. Hours passed, but Jinwoo didn't rest. He stood at the center of it all, issuing orders with precision, his mind sharper than ever. But beneath that cold control, something deeper burned. Memories, her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she refused to be afraid of him, the way she had changed him without even trying. And that was when he made a decision that would change everything. This wasn't just about getting her back. This was about ending it completely. No more threats, no more rivals, no more shadows waiting to strike if they wanted war. He would give them something they could never survive. Far away in a dimly lit room, Amara slowly opened her eyes. Her head ached, her hands bound, her surroundings unfamiliar. Panic tried to rise, but she forced it down. She wasn't weak, she couldn't be. Not now, not here. A man stepped into the light, his expression calm, almost amused. "We're awake," he said. She didn't answer, didn't look away, even now, even like this. She refused to be afraid. The man studied her for a moment, then chuckled softly. "I see why he chose you," he said. Amara's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but steady. "You don't know him," she replied. The man smiled again, but this time there was something darker behind it. "Oh," he said, "I know exactly what he is." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, but I wonder, do you?" Amara didn't respond, but deep down, she already knew. And somewhere across the city, moving like a shadow through a world about to collapse, Jinwoo was coming. The first rescue attempt didn't go the way anyone expected. It started with precision. Every movement calculated, every second accounted for. Jinwoo didn't believe in chaos. He created order, even in violence. The location had been traced to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place forgotten by time but perfect for something like this. Quiet, isolated, disposable. Perfect for a message. His men surrounded the perimeter, weapons ready, eyes sharp. But Jinwoo didn't wait for the signal. He stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "A boss?" One of them started. "Stay back," Jinwoo said coldly. There was no argument after that. Inside, the darkness was thick, broken only by dim overhead lights flickering like they were struggling to stay alive. His footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor, but his presence felt louder than any gunshot. "Come out," he said. Silence. Then a slow clap. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, one by one, calm, confident, prepared. Too prepared. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed slightly. A trap, but he didn't step back. A familiar voice cut through the tension. "You came faster than I thought." "Wait." The man from before stepped forward, the same calm expression, the same unsettling smile. Behind him, hidden deeper in the shadows, Amara, alive. Jinwoo's focus locked onto her instantly. For just a fraction of a second, everything else disappeared. She looked tired, restrained, but unbroken. And when her eyes met his, something shifted. Relief, but also fear. Not for herself, for him. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Jinwoo didn't respond. His gaze returned to the man in front of him. "Let her go," he said. Simple, direct, deadly. The man tilted his head slightly. "We're in no position to make demands." Jinwoo's expression didn't change. "And you're in no position to walk away." That was when the first shot was fired. Everything exploded into motion. Gunfire tore through the silence, bullets ripping into walls, metal, shadows. Jinwoo moved like he had been born in chaos, precise and lethal. Every shot intentional. Men dropped before they even realized what was happening. But something was wrong. There were too many. More than the intel had suggested. More than there should have been. From above, more figures appeared, cutting off exits, closing in. Jinwoo's men tried to push inside, but the entrance was sealed. Trapped. Exactly as planned. The man laughed softly amidst the chaos. "Oh, did you really think it would be that easy?" Jinwoo didn't answer. He was already moving toward Amara. Nothing else mattered. Not the bullets, not the blood, not the fact that this entire place was designed to kill him. Just her. He reached her, cutting through the restraints with a blade in one swift motion. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded. But before they could move, a gun pressed to the back of her head. Everything stopped. Jinwoo froze. The man stepped closer again, his smile gone now, replaced with something colder. "This is where it ends," he said quietly. For the first time, Jinwoo didn't move, didn't fight, didn't shoot. Because this wasn't about winning anymore, it was about her life. Amara felt it, the shift in him. The way the entire storm inside him paused, held back by one single thread, her. And that's when she understood something that changed everything. He wasn't just dangerous, he was breaking. Because of her. "Jinwoo," she said softly. His eyes flickered toward her. Don't," she continued. He didn't understand at first, but then she shook her head slightly. "A warning. A choice. If he gave in now, if he let them control him like this, they would never stop." The man pressed the gun harder. Drop it. Jinwoo's grip tightened around his weapon. Seconds stretched, the entire world balanced on a single decision. Then he let it fall. The gun hit the ground with a sharp echo. His men outside shouted in protest. Inside, the enemies smirked. But Amara, she didn't, because she saw it. This wasn't surrender. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The man chuckled. "So the great Jinwoo can kneel after all." Jinwoo slowly raised his hands. But his eyes never left Amara. And in that moment, she saw it clearly. Not fear, not defeat. A promise, cold, unshaken. Terrifying, because he hadn't lost. He had chosen. And choices like that always came with consequences. The man stepped closer, lowering the gun just slightly, confident now. Too confident. "You should have stayed the obedient son," he said. "You could have ruled everything." Jinwoo finally spoke, his voice quieter than before, but heavier. "I still will." The man frowned slightly. "Just not the way you expected." And that's when everything changed. From above, the lights shattered. Darkness swallowed the room. And within that darkness, chaos returned. But this time, it belonged to Jinwoo. The darkness didn't last more than a second. But for Jinwoo, 1 second was enough. The moment the lights shattered, the entire room dissolved into confusion. Shouts, footsteps, misfired bullets tearing into empty space. But Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He moved instantly, grabbing Amara and pulling her down just as a shot cracked past where her head had been. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice low and controlled. She nodded, even though her heart was racing. She could feel it now, the full force of what he truly was. Not just powerful, but not just dangerous, unstoppable. A flash of light sparked as one of the overhead fixtures flickered back on. In that split second, Jinwoo saw everything he needed. The positions, the exits, the threats. His mind mapped it all instantly. And then, he acted. The man who had held the gun to Amara barely had time to react before Jinwoo's on him. One swift movement. Brutal, precise, final. The body hit the ground without a sound. No hesitation, no mercy. Amara flinched. But she didn't look away this time, because she understood now. This wasn't just survival for him. This was protection. Gunfire erupted again, louder now, closer. Jinwoo pulled her toward a side exit, his body shielding hers completely. Every step forward was calculated violence, every obstacle removed without pause. But the deeper they moved, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a trap, it was a setup layered within another. "Ah, Jinwoo!" One of his men's voices crackled through his earpiece, distorted. "We've been hit from the outside. This wasn't the only location." His eyes darkened. Of course, divide him. Corner him, break him. They weren't just targeting Amara, they were targeting everything. His empire, his father, his name. And suddenly the war wasn't contained anymore. It had spread. Far beyond this warehouse. Amara felt the shift in him again, but this time it was different. Colder. Deeper. Deeper. Like something inside him had finally crossed a line it could never return from. "What's happening?" she asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. "War," he said. They reached the exit, but it exploded open before they could touch it. Wood splintered, smoke filled the air, and through it new figures stepped in. Not the same men. Different, sharper, more dangerous. The real enemy had arrived. At their center stood a woman, her presence calm, almost elegant despite the chaos around her. Her eyes locked onto Jinwoo instantly. "So this is the famous Heir," she said softly. Jinwoo didn't respond, but his stance shifted, placing Amara slightly behind him, protective, possessive, final. The woman noticed and smiled. "You've changed more than we expected," she continued. That makes this interesting." Amara's fingers tightened slightly against Jinwoo's sleeve, but she didn't step back. She didn't hide. And that caught the woman's attention too. She said, tilting her head. "Fun," she said, tilting her head. "So you're the reason." Silence. Heavy, dangerous. Then the woman's gaze returned to Jinwoo. "You've already lost more than you realize," she said. Jinwoo's voice, when it came, was colder than anything before. Try me." That was the moment the war truly began, not with a shot, but with intent. The woman raised her hand slightly, and everything erupted again. This time, it wasn't just chaos. It was calculated destruction. Jinwoo fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, but everything to protect. His movements were faster now, sharper, driven by something beyond training or instinct. Purpose. Amara stayed close, but she wasn't just a bystander anymore. She watched, learned, adapted. Every second she understood more of his world and what it demanded and what it cost. At one point their eyes met again in the middle of the chaos. And in that look, something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about standing together, no matter what came next. Minutes later, the warehouse was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. The remaining enemies retreated, not defeated, but forced back. Strategic, controlled, temporary, because this wasn't their end. It was only the beginning. Outside, the night air hit them hard, cold and real after everything inside. Sirens echoed in the distance. Fires burned behind them. Jinwoo didn't stop walking until they were far enough away. Only then did he turn to her. For a moment, he didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at her, as if confirming she was real, alive, still there. Amara exhaled slowly. "You came for me." Something in his expression shifted, only slightly. "I always will," he said, simple, certain. And that was when she realized the truth. She hadn't just changed his life, she had changed his war. Because this wasn't about power anymore. Not entirely. It was about something far more dangerous. Something that could either destroy everything or rebuild it completely. And somewhere far from the burning warehouse, the woman watched from a distance, her expression thoughtful. "Interesting," she murmured. Then she turned away. Prepare the next phase. Because this war was far from over. The drive back was silent, but not peaceful. Smoke still clung to their clothes, the scent of gunpowder refusing to fade. The city lights passed by in blurred streaks outside the tinted windows, but inside the car, the atmosphere was heavier than anything they had just survived. Jinwoo hadn't taken his eyes off the road. Amara hadn't taken her eyes off him. "We're bleeding," she said quietly. He didn't answer at first. As if pain was something beneath notice. As if it didn't matter anymore. "It's nothing," he finally replied. It wasn't nothing. But she didn't argue. Because she could see it, the shift wasn't just in his actions anymore. It was deeper. Something inside him had hardened after tonight. Something that might not soften again. And that scared her more than the guns ever could. When they reached the penthouse, everything felt off. Too quiet. Too quiet. Too still. Men were present, guards stationed as always, but their posture had changed. Eyes lowered too quickly. Movements just slightly delayed. Jinwoo noticed instantly. He stepped out of the car, his presence alone enough to make the tension snap tight. What happened here? he asked. Whoa. No one answered. That was the first confirmation. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Inside, the main hall lights were dim, casting long shadows across the marble floor, and at the center of it, his father, sitting calmly, waiting. Jinwoo's gaze sharpened. You're alive. It wasn't relief. It was calculation. The older man smiled faintly. Disappointed? Jinwoo didn't react, but Amara felt it, the energy between them. Not just tension, history, danger, truths that hadn't been spoken yet. Everyone out, his father said. The room cleared instantly. Now it was just the three of them. Silence stretched. Then you walked into their trap, his father continued, his tone almost casual. And survived, Jinwoo replied. Yes, the older man said. Well, that's not what concerns me. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what does? A pause. Then the answer came. You're no longer thinking like a leader. The words landed harder than any bullet. Amara felt it immediately, the shift in Jinwoo's stance, the tension in his jaw. I'm thinking exactly how I should be, he said. No, his father replied calmly. We're thinking like a man who has something to lose. Silence, heavy, unavoidable, and then the truth began to surface. You think tonight was about her, his father said, glancing briefly at Amara. It wasn't. Jinwoo didn't move. It was about me, the older man continued. About this empire. About something that started long before you ever met her. Amara frowned slightly. What are you talking about? The older man leaned back, studying her now. You really don't know, he said softly. Jinwoo stepped forward slightly. Enough, but it was too late. Because the secret was already coming out. She wasn't chosen by accident, his father said. Amara froze. Jinwoo's voice dropped, dangerous. Stop talking. But the older man didn't. She was brought into your life. The words hung in the air like a blade. No, Amara said immediately. That's not true, but doubt crept in, because something about the way he said it felt real. She was placed where you would find her, he continued. Every step, every moment, it was all arranged. Jinwoo moved instantly, grabbing his father's collar, pulling him to his feet. Say one more word, he warned. But the older man didn't resist, didn't flinch, because he knew something Jinwoo didn't want to accept. You think this is betrayal? He said quietly. No, this is protection. From what? Amara asked, her voice no longer steady. The answer came without hesitation. From becoming weak. That was the moment everything shattered. Jinwoo released him slowly, but his silence was louder than any rage. Amara stepped back slightly, her mind racing. You're saying I was used? The older man didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, the word cut deep. But not in the way you think, he added. Jinwoo's eyes darkened. Explain. Another pause. And then, the people you're fighting, his father said, they've been watching us for years. Waiting, studying. They knew your strength, your discipline, your control. His gaze shifted to Amara again. So they created a variable? Silence. And that variable, he finished, was her. Amara felt her chest tighten. Not fear, not pain, something else. Anger, but not at Jinwoo, at them. At being treated like a piece on a board. So what? She said, her voice steadier now. You brought me in first? To control it? The older man smiled faintly. Something like that. Jinwoo looked at her then. Really looked, and for the first time there was uncertainty. Not about her, about everything else. Amara held his gaze, and instead of breaking, she stepped forward. No, she said quietly. Both men looked at her. I'm not your plan. I'm not their plan. I'm not anyone's weakness. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. I made my own choices, she continued, and I'm still here because of them. Silence followed. But it was different now, because something had shifted again, not in Jinwoo, in her. His father watched carefully, something like interest flickering in his eyes. Well, he murmured. That's new. Jinwoo didn't smile, didn't relax, but something inside him settled. Because whatever this was, whatever had been planned, whatever had been manipulated, one thing was clear now. She wasn't controlled. She wasn't placed. She was choosing to stay. And that changed everything. Amara turned to him slightly. This war, it's not just yours anymore. Jinwoo studied her. You don't understand what you're stepping into, he said. She didn't back down. Then teach me. That was the moment. The exact moment the balance shifted. Because power had just found a new form. And far away, watching it all unfold through unseen eyes, the woman from the warehouse smiled slowly. Perfect, she whispered. Because this was exactly what she wanted. The next morning didn't feel like a new beginning, it felt like a shift in gravity. The penthouse, once a place of silent control and calculated power, now carried something different. Tension layered with uncertainty. Word had already spread, not openly, not in whispers you could hear, but in the way people moved, in the way eyes followed Amara now when she walked through the halls. They didn't see her as an outsider anymore. They saw her as a variable. And in this world, variables were dangerous. Jinwoo stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city stretching endlessly beneath him. He hadn't slept, not even for a second. His mind had been running through possibilities, betrayals, strategies, and one unavoidable truth. Someone inside had helped the enemy. Because last night's trap had been too precise, too informed, too perfect. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Amara stepped in. No hesitation, no fear. But something about her had changed. It wasn't just confidence, it was awareness. She understood now what this world demanded. And she had made a decision. She wasn't leaving. "You're thinking about it again," she said. Jinwoo didn't turn. "I'm thinking about who knew your location." A pause. "And who gave it away." Amara crossed the room slowly, stopping a few steps behind him. "Then stop thinking," she said. That made him turn. Her eyes met his steady. "Find them." Simple. Direct. Different. And for a moment Jinwoo just looked at her. Because this wasn't the same woman who had walked into his life by accident. This was someone stepping forward on purpose. Minutes later, the entire inner circle was gathered. The room was cold, silent, suffocating under the weight of what was about to happen. These were not ordinary men. They were loyalists, trusted, proven. Or at least, they had been. Jinwoo stood at the center, his presence alone enough to keep everyone on edge. His father sat off to the side, watching, not interfering, observing. Amara stood near the back at first, but then she moved. Not behind Jinwoo. Beside him. That didn't go unnoticed. A few glances shifted. Subtle? Questioning. Jinwoo didn't stop her. That was the first signal. The room understood immediately. She wasn't just someone he cared about. She was standing in his space. Last night wasn't just an attack, Jinwoo said, his voice calm but cutting through the silence. It was information. No one spoke. No one spoke. No one outside this room knew enough to set that trap, he continued. Still silence. But now, tension. Real tension. Amara's gaze moved across each face slowly. She wasn't trained like them. She didn't have years of reading micro-expressions or interrogating enemies. But she had something else. Clarity. An instinct. And right now, it was enough. "One of you knew," Jinwoo said. The words dropped like a blade. A man near the far side stepped forward slightly. "Bulls, with respect, we've all bled for this." "And one of you just bled for them," Amara said. The interruption was sharp. Unexpected. Every eye turned to her. But she didn't falter, because she wasn't guessing. She was watching, and she had already seen it. The hesitation, the glance, the shift. "Who?" she said, pointing. Straight, no doubt. The room froze. The man she pointed at didn't react immediately. But his eyes, that was enough. Jinwoo saw it too. And in the next second, everything moved. The man reached for his weapon, too slow. Jinwoo was faster, a single shot, clean, final. The body hit the ground, the echo of the gunshot ringing through the room like a verdict. Silence followed, heavy, absolute. No one questioned it, because they all knew if Jinwoo had hesitated before, he didn't anymore. And neither did she. Amara didn't look away from the body, didn't flinch, didn't step back. And that changed everything. Because now, they weren't just seeing her, they were recognizing her. Jinwoo turned slightly toward her, studying her face. "You were sure," he said. She met his gaze. She met his gaze. "I am." A pause. Then quietly, "Because they underestimate me." That was when something shifted in the room. Not fear. Respect. Slow. Unspoken. But real. From the side, his father let out a quiet breath, almost like a soft laugh. "Well," he murmured, "this is unexpected." But his eyes were sharper now. Because he saw it too. She wasn't a weakness. She was becoming something else, something dangerous in a completely different way. Later, when the room was empty again, Jinwoo stood alone with her. The weight of what had just happened lingered between them. "You crossed a line today," he said. Amara didn't deny it. "I know. I know. And you can't go back from that. I'm not trying to silence." "Then to why?" he asked. It wasn't a test. It was real. And her answer came just as honestly. "Because if I stay the same," she said, "I'll lose you to this world." That hit deeper than anything else. Jinwoo looked at her for a long moment. Because this was the choice. The one he had been avoiding, power, or her, control, or something real. But standing here now, watching her step into his world without breaking, he realized something. Maybe it wasn't a choice anymore. Maybe she was changing the rules entirely. He stepped closer, not as a boss, not as a weapon, but as a man. "You don't need to become this," he said quietly. Amara shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "I need to become strong enough to stand next to it." And that was the moment Jinwoo understood. This wasn't about losing himself anymore. It was about deciding what kind of empire he wanted to build. Behind them, unseen eyes were still watching, and the woman from before smiled slowly. "Perfect," she whispered again. Because now, the real game had finally begun. The war didn't arrive loudly. It spread, like fire under the surface, silent, suffocating, unstoppable. Within days, everything Jinwoo had built, everything his father had controlled for decades, began to fracture. Safe houses were exposed. Shipments intercepted. Allies turned distant. Enemies grew bold. This wasn't just an attack anymore. It was an attempt to erase them. And at the center of it all was her. Amara felt it before anyone said it out loud. The way movements around her became tighter. The way guards doubled. The way Jinwoo's attention never strayed too far from her anymore. She wasn't just part of the war. She had become its focus. "They're not trying to break you," she said one night, standing beside him as the city burned quietly in the distance. Jinwoo didn't respond. "They're trying to break you through me." Silence. Because it was true. And they both knew it. Across the city, the woman who had started all of this stood in a high-rise, watching the chaos unfold like a masterpiece. She had never cared about power alone. Power was predictable. Control was temporary, but transformation? That was rare. And Jinwoo, he was transforming exactly the way she wanted. "A phase final," she said softly. Behind her, men moved instantly. Because tonight, it would end. Not with strategy, not with manipulation, but with something far more absolute. Choice. Back at the penthouse, the final message arrived. Not through networks, not through threats, but directly. A single call. Jinwoo answered it without hesitation. "Bring her," the woman's voice said calmly. No disguises anymore, no games, or watch everything fall. The line went dead. Amara had already heard enough. "No," she said, "immediately." Jinwoo didn't look at her. "Don't," she added, stepping in front of him now. His eyes finally met hers. And for the first time since all of this began, there was conflict. Real conflict. Real conflict. Because this was the choice. Her, or everything else. "If you go alone, it's over," she said. "That's what she wants. And if I don't," he replied quietly, "they won't stop." She held his gaze. "Then we end it. Not escape, not survive. End." Something in him stilled. Because that wasn't fear in her voice. It was certainty. Hours later, the final battlefield revealed itself. Not a warehouse. Not a hidden location, but the heart of the city itself. An unfinished skyscraper towering above everything. Exposed steel, open floors. Nothing to hide behind. No shadows. No escape. Only truth. Jinwoo didn't bring an army, and neither did she. Because this wasn't that kind of war anymore. At the top floor, the woman stood waiting. Calm, elegant, certain. "You came," she said, her eyes flicking between them. Jinwoo stepped forward slightly. "It ends tonight," she smiled. "Yes," she agreed, "it does." The wind howled around them, carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "You could have ruled everything," she said to him. But you chose her." No," Jinwoo replied. "I chose differently." A pause. Then her gaze shifted to Amara. "And you," she said softly. "Do you understand what you've done?" Amara didn't hesitate. "Yes." The woman tilted her head slightly. "And you're not afraid?" Amara's answer came without a second thought. "I was." A step forward. But not anymore. Silence. Then the final move began. It wasn't chaos this time. It was direct. Precise. Brutal. The woman moved first. Faster than expected. Deadlier than before. She wasn't just a strategist. She was a weapon. Jinwoo met her head on. Every movement between them was lethal, controlled, absolute. This wasn't a fight for dominance. This was a fight for existence. Amara didn't stay back. She couldn't, because she understood now this wasn't his war alone. At one critical moment, everything shifted. A blade, a misstep, a fraction of a second, and suddenly Jinwoo was exposed. The woman saw it, moved for it, and would have ended it if Amara hadn't stepped in. The strike meant for him landed on her. Time stopped. Jinwoo caught her before she hit the ground. The world around them faded into nothing. Why? His voice broke for the first time. Amara's breath was shallow, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Because, she whispered, you would have done the same. Silence, heavy, final, something inside Jinwoo shattered completely. Not control, not power, something deeper. And when he stood again, he wasn't the same man. There was no hesitation left, no conflict, no choice, only one truth. This ends now. The final moment was fast, brutal, absolute. The woman realized it too late, because the man standing in front of her now wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to end, and he did. When it was over, the wind carried the silence across the empty structure. The war was done. Jinwoo dropped to his knees beside Amara, pulling her closer, his hands steady despite everything. Stay with me, he said, his voice no longer cold, no longer distant, just real. She smiled faintly. You're still here, she whispered. I told you, he said, his voice breaking just slightly. Always will be. Her hand tightened weakly around his. Then don't lose yourself again. A pause, a breath, and then stillness. The city below continued like nothing had changed. But everything had. Days later, the Empire stood quieter. Not weaker, different. Jinwoo ruled. But not the way his father had. Not with fear alone, not with distance. Something had changed in him permanently, and in every decision he made, she was still there. Not as a weakness, not as a memory, but as the reason the Empire no longer needed to burn to survive. Because in the end, she hadn't just changed his life. She had changed what power meant. And that was something no war could ever destroy.